All right, so I think I'm going to add just a little bit more lighter colors to this water because we already got the lightest color on the rocks, but I think the water is going to be just a little bit more bright because it's wet, you know. Wet things will have more sparkly values on them, like a lighter value. So I'm just going to move my slider to a more cyan color. I'm going to move my opacity down to 10%, and this is just going to help me just slowly build up these lighter colors until I kind of get what I want. Right along the top here. And now I don't think I'm going to go to pure white on the top, just because the moon isn't as bright as the sun would be. So there might not be like pure white sparkles or in it, but it's not in my reference. I don't have a lot of pure white. Maybe I'll try it out in this painting though, just to see what it looks like. But let's go to pure cyan and then maybe add a little bit of white. So just move to the white corner of your painting, and I'll turn up my opacity to 30%, just right along the top here. Right here I'm painting right over black, which is, well, a darker blue, which isn't good to do, but I'm just going to go back and paint some blue around it afterwards, just so I don't have to change my colors. So I'm just going to go to a bright blue color and just paint around this. Let's maybe do it a little bit more cyan blue, just a tiny bit, because this is pure cyan, so I'm just going to blend that out a little bit. Just going to do a black flare along this bottom real quick, just to add some color variation, and then add some lighter blue. I think I added a little bit too much of the pure cyan. You know, I'm not the quickest at getting what I want. Just is a lot of back and forth, but it does give me a lot of practice, and I do think I'm getting faster at painting than I used to, but it still takes me a while. So don't feel discouraged if it takes you a few hours of just kind of going back and forth or looking at the reference to just kind of get the shapes correct, because when I first started painting, it did take me probably 3 times as long than it's taking me now to paint. I'm going to add another vertical rock right in the middle here. It's probably a little bit too bright, so I'm going to maybe tone it down a little bit with this darker color. Just going to fade this out with some black. It's not going to be a ton of detail right in this area, so I just kind of keep fading it out if it gets too bright. Try to follow some of the shapes I'm seeing in this reference. I'm going to change the angle of this waterfall here. It needs to be more straight, because in a worm's eye view, something in the center of, like in the middle of the page, is going to be going straight, and then the farther you get to the side, that's when it's going to be slanted. So I think I have it just a little bit too slanted right in the middle here. It's kind of in the wrong perspective. You know, when you're painting rocks, you can kind of get away with not having perspective lines, just because rocks can be bigger at the top than at the bottom, or there's lots of variation, you know, versus if you're drawing a building. But if it's too off, something's going to look off. So yeah, I still have to keep my perspective in mind. Like if I had imaginary perspective lines, they're kind of more angled towards the edge and more straight towards the center. You know, the angle on the other side of your rock is going to be very sharp, like very downward. Like this angle up here, it's going pretty sharp downward. And the same over here, like you want to keep it going not too horizontal, or you don't want it to be too visible, because even if it's going away from the viewer, it's also going to be going down just because of the perspective. I'm just trying to get a good variety of shapes. I don't want too many thin lines next to other thin lines, and I want variations in the height of the rock. So if I have a rock here, I won't want to make another rock right here or at the same height. It just won't look as good. So I just need to think about making each rock have a lot of variety, and I just need to kind of think of the spacement and the placement of these rocks. They can be many different shapes. It's just how you place them together. I'm painting with like a little bit more blue highlight here. I'm just trying it out. It's not in my reference. I just want to see how it looks. Like kind of like a blue highlight on top of these rocks. It might look kind of cool. Kind of add some variation in this highlight color here. I kind of like it. I'm looking at my reference and I don't see this shape here, and I'm not liking it either, so I'm going to make this more horizontal as well. Just kind of do a little crack in it, because that's in my reference. And that looks interesting to have just like a little bit of variety in this rock right here, because none of these rocks have a center crack. So that's why it looks good, is because it's different. If all these rocks had this center crack, you wouldn't want to put another center crack in here, you know. So it's all about looking around at your other rocks and just trying to do something different, but not too different. Like those horizontal lines were a little bit too different. It wasn't going in the right direction for this rock feeling that I want. I'm going to straighten out this waterfall because somehow it's still not straight. This is in the center of my page, so it needs to be going straight, or more straight at least. In my reference, it's a tiny bit slanted, and it doesn't look too bad that way, so maybe my vanishing point is just slightly to the right, so it might still be slanted a little bit, or slightly to the left, I guess it would be if it's slanting in this direction. Yeah, if you want to learn about vanishing points, like how to do these bird's eye and worm's eye views, and how to draw buildings and boxes at different rotations, I have a tutorial on that in my channel. I think it really helps me, like, to know all those things. It really helps me when creating paintings, because I can just keep the vanishing point principles in the back of my mind when I'm trying to make something look correct. So it's a really good thing for beginner artists to kind of learn. So feel free to check out that tutorial. I'm just going to go around and kind of harden these edges out a little bit with a hard brush, with a hard eraser, and just kind of make the edge of this just a little bit more sharp. Because these are rocks, so there's not going to be faded edges. Like if this is a cloud, you would have some places where it was hard and some places where it was faded, but all along the edge here is going to be pretty sharp. Let's unlock this layer. Just going to do some final adjustments to this canyon because this shape over here is still not right compared to my reference, and I'm not liking it better than my reference. What's really nice about digital painting is I can make all these adjustments to this edge without having to repaint my sky at all, you know? I just erase it. I don't have to, like, I could have my sky completely done if I wanted and still make adjustments. In original art, you can't do that. You kind of have to work from back to front, and you can't make a lot of adjustments in front of something really complicated, or else you have to go back and repaint that part. But with digital, you know, you can just erase the layer that's over top. And I noticed here, I think I drew my entire canyon just a little bit more to the left because I don't have as much room over here as on my reference, but I don't necessarily think that is a big game changer. Like, I don't think that affects my composition. You know, having a little bit more room over here and less space over here isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I might just keep it and just see. And if it does start affecting or just starting to look wrong, I can always select my entire picture and just kind of move it over to the right a little bit. I think I still need to move these waterfall shapes down. I still think they're a little bit too high. So I'm just going to select it with the lasso tool and then go to move, my move tool, bring it down. I think I keep making them taller. I don't know what I'm doing, or I just never had them as far down as they need to be. And I'm going to make this rock lower because I kind of drew it in correlation to the waterfall. It's kind of almost, well, it's a little bit higher than the waterfall. I kind of like that because it kind of goes in the same shape, almost like carries on the shape. But it's like a rock instead of the waterfall. Looks a little bit interesting. I'm just going to do another dark flare down here, maybe a little bit up here as well. Make some variation in this color. All right, so I think that's enough fiddling around for right now. I'm not sure if I'm completely happy with all the shapes, but it's getting pretty close, and I don't want to get too much into the details before I add stuff to the sky, because I'm going to add more value to the sky, which is going to change how this looks, like this bright color here. So I'm just going to make a new layer here, and it's going to be over top of the moon because we're going to have some clouds in front of the moon. So it's just going to be right behind this canyon layer. So I'm going to color pick this cyan bluish color. I'm just going to make it more cyan. So just move your slider up to more cyan color. And we're just going to paint in. Let's make our brush soft and a bit bigger. And we're just going to paint in some clouds right over top of the moon here. So since these clouds are closer to the moon, this is going to be the brightest color. We're going to paint some bright clouds. Maybe over here, like the moon is shining some bright light over on this side as well. And I'm going to try not to paint in this area on this top layer just in case, well, it's just going to be easier for me to add detail behind the moon if I avoid painting in this area. Just paint below the moon on this new layer as much as possible. I'm going to color pick this and then go to pure cyan and just add some white to it. So I'm just going to move it, my slider, up to the white corner of my triangle. And I'm going to add some white for this really bright whitish cyan right along the edge of this cloud, right near the moon, just right up against it. And then I'm going to go to pure white, and that's even going to be closer to the moon that I'm going to paint, because the closer you get, the brighter and brighter, the more cyan and then the more white it's going to be. I'm going to make my eraser soft here and maybe at 30%, just so I can erase parts of this. I'm going to add some detail to this moon just so I can see the white clouds that I'm painting over the moon. Right now I can't see anything, so I'm just going to select, go to your move tool, and if it's on auto select, you can just select your moon, just touch your moon, and it will automatically go to that layer. And then you can go to your transparent lock and just lock the layer, because you don't want to paint outside of your moon. And I'm just going to pick, let's just pick a bluish cyan color and see how that looks on the moon. Let's do this at 10% opacity. I'm just going to color pick this so it's actually even whiter than the color I did, because it's going to be really, like, there's not going to be a ton of color in the moon. It's going to be mostly white. You don't want to go too overboard. I might add some of this bright cyan white to it, like this pure cyan, because that will even be a brighter hue. And I'll add some color variation. One thing to avoid, don't go to the very edge of the moon when you're doing this, because it's going to be the brightest right around the edge of the moon. If you do, you can just go back with white and just paint around that edge again. And I'm actually going back with white and just painting in some details in this moon, maybe with a slightly smaller brush, because the smaller you make the brush, the harder the lines are going to get as well. So you don't necessarily have to make your brush harder, you just have to make it smaller, and it will automatically kind of make more harder lines. I think I really like the moon in the reference, so maybe I'll look over there a little bit and see the shapes that's in that moon, because I think that kind of turned out nice. I'm gonna go pure white here. And I can experiment just a tiny bit. Doesn't have to be, just has to have a lot of variety and not be too dark. So I might flare over with like a, let's flare over with a, so maybe this side is more green cyan. So I just did a big flare of green, and then I'll go back with white and paint in that white again. It just makes the value shift in the moon more interesting. Because there's two colors. There's this greenish cyan and then this bluish cyan in the moon. It's going to make it look a lot better. More interesting, at least. Just kind of fiddle around with these shapes until you kind of get a shape you like. Kind of a moon that you like. And you can look at your navigator tab over here and you can see what it looks like from a distance. Because that's the most important, what your painting looks like when you step away from it. Let's make it a little bit, maybe a more grayish blue. We can add a tiny bit of gray. I'll go to 10% opacity and just paint in a tiny bit. And then color pick that tiny bit and paint with that color. That will make a really soft transition. So like not everything is the same shade, but it's not too dark either. Just try out different shades in different areas. And I think I like this really bright white spot here, like this big shape. Because if I put another spot over here, it will just look like 3 identical spots. You don't want the same size of spots around in your moon. You know, you want variation, a lot of variation. So I might make this spot a little bit bigger and then this spot a bit smaller, just to add some different kind of shapes in here. Just paint in with white and kind of make even smaller little shapes within those shapes, you know. Maybe a very, very, let's go 10% and like pure cyan, and then like a very, very soft kind of shade in this white area. And I can go back with white and kind of make some more harder lines in that shaded area. It's just getting the right combination of shapes. That's really going to make your moon look good. It's kind of a common thing throughout everything you draw, really, is just getting a good variety. The more variety you have, the more natural it's going to look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It doesn't look anything like my reference, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just going to flare out a few edges with white, just add, so it's not so sharp in some areas. And then, yeah, I think I'll move on here. So next, I'm going to go to my cloud layer, my front cloud layer, and just paint some more brighter colors. Because now I'll be able to see my cloud in front of my moon here. Now that it has some detail on it. So I just can paint a brighter white cloud right up next to the moon. And then I'm going to paint a dark cloud kind of next to the moon as well. to kind of give a value shift there, or some value variation. So maybe there's a dark cloud comes up next to that moon as well. It's kind of what I see in my reference, and I really like it. I'm going to add some lighter cyan to kind of negative paint in this cloud. Maybe give it some more interest. Then I'm going to color pick this in-between color between this blue and this cyan, and I'm going to paint some more clouds in front. It's kind of like an in-between shade and hue here. I'm using my eraser, not my color picker in this area, just because I want to keep this area pure from this overtop layer so that I can make adjustments behind this moon without running into my layer above. So I'm just kind of erasing. Don't color pick and do this in this area. You can, but it's just easier in the long run, I think, to keep them separate. I'm going to flip my canvas because I'm going to paint over here, I think, a little bit. And I'm going to paint in, I'm going to color pick this dark cloud and just paint in some more clouds over top of this cloud. Some darker clouds. I'm going to paint an in-between color here as well to kind of help blend this bright cyan with the dark blue below it. It's still a little bit cyan, so I'm going to go to my bright blue and paint a little bit more of that in there, because remember, you don't want to mix cyan with black. So if you find yourself encroaching into that area, you just need to put down some more bright blue so that it kind of separates those colors. And I'm just doing this at 10% opacity here. Just fading it down into this black. I kind of see that happening in my reference, so I'm following kind of the shapes I see in my reference just so I can get it right quicker the first time. Because clouds also have a composition thing you have to worry about. You know, it's not just painting random shapes. They all have to kind of correlate with each other and have variation in them in the right ways. So when you're doing a new painting, sometimes it takes some experimenting to know what those shapes are. I'm going to color pick this, just paint right crossing over, like through this waterfall cliff area. Kind of brings your attention to it just a tiny bit. Kind of looks cool. That's also in my reference. I think looks really interesting. I'm going to darken up this area. And since I'm painting black into this cyan color, it's not a pure cyan, but it still has cyan in it. So that means I need to paint some bright blue here, or else it's going to start looking ugly. After I paint that bright blue, then I can keep encroaching into this area. I'm just going to duplicate this layer just in case I want to go back to it, because I like how it looks right now and I might mess it up. So I just duplicated it and then I hid the layer that I duplicated And that's just in case. I have less space over here than I do on my reference. So there's not so much dark over here, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you have slight differences in your painting and it still looks good, you like how it looks, there's no reason to have to change it to look exactly like mine. So I'm just using my color picker tool and just going back and forth between these shapes. So I'm also going to add, well, my moon is actually higher in this new painting of mine than my other painting. So my other painting has like this kind of shape that comes down around the moon on the top, like a cloud. But I think in this painting it would just overcrowd it because it'd be way too close. Because my moon's farther up in this repainting of mine. So I think I won't have anything up above the moon. I could move my entire painting down, which is something I might do actually. So I'm going to go over to my layers and I'm just going to hit the top layer and then I'm going to hit shift and scroll all the way down to the bottom layer. And that's just going to select my whole painting. And then I'm going to go to the move tool here. And I'm just going to move, well, some of my layers are locked, so I actually have to unlock my layers here. Make sure none of them are locked, and then select all of them. And then I'm going to move my entire painting downward a little bit. Let's just see how that looks. We can always go back. I'm going to deselect it and I'm just going to paint this in with black real quick. This is like the layer below my clouds, moon, and cliffs here. So I'm painting on the layer that's behind this moon here. I'm just going to paint that all in with black. And then I'm going to go in with my cloud layer, my front cloud layer, and then just paint in the tops here. Just kind of fill in this area. Just color pick and just kind of fill this in. That might give more space to my sky and it will be a little bit more in line with my reference. In doing that, I can maybe do that kind of cool little circle around the moon, or like this little shape that's coming around. It kind of shows a cool perspective of the clouds. I really think it's an interesting kind of shape to have these twirling clouds around. I'm just going to add some white to the very edge, like the moon's lighting it up. And then to blend in these colors, I'm going to go to pure cyan and maybe have some white in it. And to blend it out with that kind of color, that brighter color. Let's flip my canvas. I'm going to paint on this side now. So I'm going to add some white to the edge of this cloud here because maybe the moon is lighting it up really bright along this edge. Maybe I'll add some really bright blue right next to this cloud just to make it kind of glow, and then I can add more cyan without making it gray. Alright, I'm going to just soften this area down here a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more of this blue cyan to the bottom here. Like this blue cyan almost looks purple from a distance. It almost looks like it has a purple tint, which is kind of weird because it's cyan is more further away from purple than blue. Just do a really light cyan color, pure cyan here. It's almost like a green color, pure cyan. Looks really green against this blue cyan. I'm going to go to 10% opacity here and just blend this out. Blend these two together really softly. If you ever want to blend something really softly, just go to 10% and you can get it really quickly, pretty easily. Alright, before I get into too much detail, I'm going to paint in this behind layer. Let's just make some more interesting shapes in here. It's all kind of really blended right now, kind of soft. I'm going to just make some interesting wispy kind of shapes. And we want it kind of bright. Oh wait, I think I might be on my moon layer here. Whoops. Oh well, let me just go below. And I'm going to paint right by the moon on the layer that's behind. I accidentally painted everything else above the moon or on the same layer as the moon, so for the rest I'll just paint on the same layer as the moon layer. I'll just be careful not to get close to the moon when I'm doing this. Sometimes you mess up your layers, but it's not a huge deal. It's just you have to be a little bit more restrained when you paint. People who paint in oil and acrylic and stuff, they always have to be restrained and make sure they don't paint over the stuff they've already done. So it's not a huge deal. Gonna make sure there's some blue up here where this bright cloud is. And I'm gonna add some really bright blue. Brightest blue you can get here. Right along this area. Just like a really bright spot. And then I'm going to color pick the darker colors and kind of fade it in, make it kind of wispy. Do a really dark color here. It's almost black. Kind of fade in these colors. I'm kind of following the shape that I see in the reference and the values I see in the reference. It's just kind of a safe way. And if I follow it, you know, I know it's going to turn out good. I'm going to start off by painting a little bit. Let's go to 10% opacity. And since this is a bright blue, I can even paint black over this and it's not going to look bad. Versus if I did it over cyan. And this front cloud is on a different layer, so I can just go crazy over here and stuff. But right here, like, see how that, I don't want to go too far. Unless I want to go back and erase that cyan cloud. Because I want this bright blue to be up against that cyan. Alright, so I think that looks pretty good. So before we continue with more detail, I think it would be a good idea to add the stars to our painting, because that's going to change how the sky looks. So to add stars, we're going to turn off our pressure sensitivity from our brush or our pen here, just like we did with the moon. And we're going to turn up our hardness to 100%, And we are also going to go to a pure white color here. And so you should be able to paint in your stars now with the size that you see on your screen, the size of your cruiser here. So with this size of star, I think we'll just make one star this size because this is a pretty big star. And we'll just make it over here. And then we're going to make our brush a bit smaller, one tap smaller, and maybe we'll add 2 of that size. I think I somehow got on the wrong layer here. So you have to make a layer right below your canyon layer here. Okay, so let's make my big star here again. So make one star there, and make a star here and here. And then we're going to make our brush even smaller. Just one tap smaller. Let's make a star there and maybe over here. Maybe 3 stars of that size. Every size you get smaller, you can add more of that type of star to your painting. And let's go a bit smaller. So one tap smaller, and we can add maybe 5 of these stars. And the only place I wouldn't recommend placing these stars is right in the cyan area, because these are pretty thick clouds. So the stars aren't going to be in that area because this is like covering up the stars. So just put them in random places, and then I'm going to make my brush even smaller here. And I'm just going to add a little bit more of them. You don't want to go overboard with the number of your stars, because the more stars you add, the less bright they're going to appear in the sky. So you don't want to add too many of them. I'm going to go even smaller. One tap smaller. And I'm just going to try to, with these little stars, add some variation in how spread apart they are from the other stars. So since these are smaller stars, you can add a little bit more of them here. And you want to make sure there's areas where there's no stars, or less stars, and maybe areas where there's more of them. So then I'm going to go even smaller. So just one tap smaller, and add your final stars here. Just try to add some close to other stars and then some out all by themselves. Like the more variation in the spacing is going to make it look prettier and more natural. And do less stars in this thick area, because that's clouds that's probably covering up stars. All right, so once you got that down, let's just go back with a little bit of black. We're just going to do the layer right under the stars. So just make a new layer right under the stars, and we're going to make our brush soft. I'm just going to add a tiny bit more black to a few areas. just to make the sky a little bit less covered with clouds here. Up in this area. Maybe I'll do a big flare of black here. Kind of give some variation to this transition. Doing big flares can kind of really give a lot of variety in the way the colors fade. And since I added black over this cyan, I need to either erase it or add some blue into it. I'm going to turn my pressure sensitivity on. Yeah, pressure sensitivity is really important to have like a natural feel to your painting. Let's add a little bit of bright blue over here next to this cyan that's getting covered up with this dark. We'll go 10% opacity because I did that black flare and I covered up a bit of cyan color. So I need to go back with some bright blue to kind of help make that more pretty. Kind of get rid of that cyan color in this dark area. And then I can go over with my black flare again and let's go to 30% opacity and kind of blend that in again. Because now I'm blending in blue instead of cyan. Let's go to 10% and maybe bring a bit of blue back up. You can go back and forth because maybe some parts of the cloud is very soft, like the flare, and other parts it would go all the way up. Just add lots of variety to the way that you're blending these clouds, and it's going to make it look more natural and pretty and interesting. I'm going to go to full brightness here and do a big blue flare. And that way you can do it the opposite. You can flare it with a brighter color. And that also gives interest to your sky here. I'm gonna flare out this blue, kind of fade that really softly into this area, and maybe flare out, let's go to 10% opacity, flare out this cyan color here. I'm gonna paint some more cyan up here, and then maybe a brighter, like an in-between color, so this kind of softly goes into this blue, this bright blue color. Maybe fill in this dark area here. I'm going to go pure cyan and make my brush smaller. Just paint a really bright cyan right along the edge here. Do the same over here, right next to the moon. Do like a little flare of this bright, bright cyan right next to the moon. Kind of give it some color variation over there. Maybe flare it down in this part. It doesn't really matter where you're doing it completely. It's just doing it in different areas. I'm going to go pure white. I'm just going to do a new layer just so I can erase if I paint, if it doesn't look quite right. Putting this pure white, see, I'll go to my eraser and kind of just fade that out where I don't want it exactly. Because you don't want white all the way along this cloud. in every place, you know, because you want variety. You want different thicknesses of white, and some places you won't even have any white along the edge. You'll just have the bright cyan. And that will just add more interest to what you're doing. See it over here, this dark cloud. Even though it's right next to the moon, it could be darker than those clouds over there just by how thick it is. And that will kind of give some cool variety to not have all the clouds near the moon to be pure white or really bright, you know, because there's different thicknesses to clouds, and that's going to affect how bright they are as well. Kind of blend this white down just a little bit. You don't want to paint white over blue either, just like you don't want to paint cyan, because if they mix together, it's going to make this kind of lightish blue that's not very interesting. Doesn't look like it's glowing or anything like that. So I'm going to flip my canvas, and this will just allow me to paint over here a little bit easier. So I'm on the top cloud layer, but I'm just going to paint in this area now just because I have the basic shape I want. It's just easier than going back below. I messed that layer up anyway with the moon, so I'm just going to paint the moon, the clouds, all of that on the same layer. The only thing that's not on the same layer is the cliffs and the white stars. So I'm just using my color picker to paint back or erase the white that I don't want. I'm going to flare out this white here, just right along here, just to give some variation in the clouds. All right, before I get too much into that, into the details, I'm going to add some glows to these stars. So I'm going to make a new layer, and it's going to be right above my cloud and moon layer, right below the star layer. And I'm just going to go to a bright blue color, and I'm going to go to 30% opacity and make my brush as soft as it can be. And then I'm just going to tap in right behind the stars this bright blue shade. And some you can make your brush really big and do like a bigger flare, like a really bright flare. I might even go to 10% opacity for some of these to do like a really soft flare around them, because the flares aren't necessarily going to be all circular. Like there could be some wispy clouds in there that are picking up some of the light as well. But you don't want all the flares to be the same size, so make some of them big and some of them smaller. You know, so I'm going back with my eraser to the ones I made too many big flares over there, to just make sure I'm not doing too much of the same size of flares. These little glows around these stars really make them look like they're bright and lighting up the air around it. Because everything that has light to it, it's going to affect the things around it. So that's why it's important to add this glowing effect to make it look like it's bright. Do a really bright flare right there, maybe. Maybe a really bright one right there as well. Kind of blend those two together, maybe. Do a bright one, a big one right there. Okay, after you got that bright blue down, then we're going to add cyan to the glows of the stars. So we're just going to move up to a cyan color. And maybe let's make a new layer for it. We're just going to tap in that cyan color. Now the only thing that's important when doing this is to make sure you're not tapping it over the black. Just like I've said, you know, in other parts of the video, you never want to tap cyan over black. So if you have a star that doesn't have very much bright blue around it, you might not have any cyan around it. So just the ones with this really bright blue around it is going to get this cyan glow. And the cyan can be really close to the stars, like in these really soft or not very blue areas, like it's going to be right next to the star, because that's where you added that bright blue. But you don't want to do like a big flare in a place where you didn't do a big flare of blue, you know, if that makes sense. I don't think I'm at full brightness. I need to go full brightness here. 100%. So I was starting to paint in some pure cyan areas and it was looking like it was darker than it should be. Let's add this pure cyan right next to the edge of the stars. I'm going to add a little bit more blue color to these stars down here because I must have forgotten to do them. And I think they'd look pretty with a little bit of glow to them. And then I'll add the cyan in. One other thing you could do is you can make some of your stars glow like purple instead of blue, because I see that in my reference too and it kind of looks cool. So like I'm going to merge these two layers here just so my glows are all on the same layer, and then I might go with some purple and maybe just change some of these glows to a more purple hue here. Just change them up. It doesn't have to be very many because I don't think stars really do glow this color, but it might look kind of cool to have a little bit of color variation. You know, you have the artistic license to do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be realistic necessarily. And then over that purple, you could add magenta, because remember, magenta is a brighter hue than purple or red or green. And so if you add magenta to the center of the purple stars, it's going to even make it more obvious that it's a different color here. not too many places. Like over here, see, you have a more greenish star and then a purple star and some blue stars. I think that kind of looks cool. I'm gonna flip my canvas, paint over in this area. So I'm just painting below the stars here and maybe adding a little bit more blue in some areas, because it's kind of cool to add a little bit of more blue variation where the stars are, because maybe the stars are lighting up the air around it a lot more brightly than other areas. So at this point, I'm just kind of adjusting my colors, my values and things of the sky. Just to try to make it more interesting, more variation across it. Just going to erase that and bring that back in. I'm going to see if I can kind of blend this star out, like this shade, and then also this magenta shade, because I don't know if I like that purple star right there. I think I'm just going to merge the glow layer and the new layers I'm doing. It's just so I can edit these glows a little bit while I'm painting. I don't know if I like everything about the glows. I think some of them are glowing just a little bit too brightly, and that's not, they're not all gonna glow. Some might even not look like they're glowing at all. Like if you add too much glow, everything's just gonna look blurry, your entire painting. So you want some stars to be very crisp and simply white. I'm gonna do a new layer and try to add just a little tiny bit more detail to these clouds. I'm going to go 10% opacity because I want to do this just very faintly and maybe with a really soft brush. Maybe make these clouds just have a little bit more little shapes inside of them, or harden a few edges so it doesn't look like they're all just blending the same way together. There's going to be hard edges, and then there's going to be soft edges, and then there's going to be really soft edges where it's just kind of flared out. And if you have all those things in there, it's going to end up looking the best. I'm going to make a new layer because I really like that part I put up there, but don't know how much I want to erase of this. I'm going to put some bright blue up next to this cyan here because I want to add more black to this area. So to transition it, I need to have that bright blue there. So now I can add some more black here. It's just going back to see how much black I need in this sky. Kind of want a good balance of blacks and faded out blues. If you notice, I'm not really adding any white to my hues. You know, the only time I paint with white is when I'm doing my bright highlights, because the cyan is automatically going to add in that lighter color, and you really don't need to make it more white. So I think I'm going to just time lapse this last part for you. This is just me going through and just softening up some areas, hardening some areas, just doing the last final touch up. You know, I just need to like soften my round brush strokes, and then I flare things out as well in a few areas. Like I put a little flare at the bottom of my waterfall, just kind of blends all the layers together and makes things come together really nicely. You know, I do this all on the same layer, so the very top layer. And this just allows me to, you know, do all those flares and those things that kind of merge the layers together just right at the end. Just doing the final touch up without having to worry about shifting layers or going to a new layer. So that's about it. This new painting is now very similar to the reference. There are a few areas that are slightly different, like the moon is a little bit higher and the shape of the cliffs in some areas are a bit different, but overall, I think it turned out pretty similar. You know, please comment if you have any questions, and also feel free to post your own version of this scene on social media sites to show others what you did. I only ask that you put the link to this tutorial in your art's description so I can get credit for the basic design. I hope you'll come back and create another painting with me soon. See you next time.